Okay, so we're holding Hilchos Melicha Siman Samach Tes. Last time we left off in Ibov about the amount of time that's required for Melicha. In the Gemara we said that it's not so clear. All it states is that the Shir of Melicha, Meliach Keroteach, Meliach is Keshir Tzliya, the amount of time that is required to extract the blood through roasting of the fire. Since the Meliach is Keroseach, meaning that it has a form of heat, and it's very comparable to Tzliya, so that we would assume from that the time requirements are the same. Just it doesn't say time, it just says like Tzliya. So what is like Tzliya? So the Rambam brought down B'Shem de Geonim, that the Shir of Tzliya, Kehiluch Mil, the amount of time it takes to walk a mil. And he says that there's no real chiluk between if it's a big piece or a smaller piece, thick or thin. It's the sheer meal. The only one, I think, or at least one of the poskim that says that it would vary depending on the size of the chaticha, is in the Agos Ashri. That depending on the thickness, depending on its size, it may require more time. You look at the Rambam also says only Kedei Hiluch Mil, but does not differentiate, as far as I don't think he says anything about the various sizes. He doesn't tell us, however, what shear meal is. So the question is, what is a shear meal? But before we get to that, we also there's a Rashi, the Beis Yosef brings down, I think that he also says it's a shear meal. Tumas Adeshem was the one that says that the Minhag HaOlam, the custom has been to leave it in its salt for an hour. In other words, without elaborating too much as to why, just that's the minhag ha'olam. That's the custom. However, there is a asmachta to it, if you want to call it an asmachta. There is a connection why an hour? What's wrong with a half an hour? Where's the hour taken from? So the connection is from Gemara and Psachim, where you find that the tzli of the Korban Pesach lasted about an hour. Or I should say, it did not last more than an hour. So from there we take it that since that was tzliya, that is what was done to the Korban Pesach, was roasting, it did not last for more than an hour, so that could be some sort of a connection or a mekor to this minhag. What about the halacha? Halacha l'maisa, we learned that we should be makpid and should leave it in its salt for an hour. Unless the situation is as such that you're very much in a rush, of Shabbos, a lot of guests are coming, then you can rely on the more lenient opinions. And that's what the Mechaber brings down. The Ramah. So the Mechaber says should not be less than a Hiluch Mil, which is 1/3 of an hour approximately. And the Ramah says, B'di'eved, you could be soymech on that. But lechatchila, or even lechatchila lichvod oichin, or letzorach Shabbos, you can rely on that. Otherwise, leave it for an hour. And that's the halacha, according to the Ramah. As far as the actual shear of meal, the Mechaber holds that it's 18 minutes approximately. He says a third of an hour, 18 to 20 minutes. And this mekor to that is in the Trumas Adeshen. The Pichodosh, in a crazy place, they bring the Rambam in the Pirush HaMishnayos, who says that the shear of meal is about 2/5 of an hour, which is 24 minutes. And other Achronim wrote that according to Rashi, in Psachim, it's mashma that it was 22.5 minutes. And as we explained last time, it all depends on really how you interpret the sugya there in the Gemara. How much does the person walk during the day? How you divide the day? That is how they come up with the various shiur. But at least we know that the very least should be 18 minutes. Nobody should be any more lenient than that. But the minhag is, according to the Ramah, an hour. All right. So Baruch Hashem, we've salted the piece of meat or the chicken. Now what? What's the next step? The next step is an important step. Before you cook it, you have to rinse off the salt. You have to remove the salt, whatever is there. And the question is how to remove it. And what happens if you didn't remove it? This salt is, of course, a salt that has absorbed blood in it. So even though most of the blood hopefully drained off. That's what the salt was there, to extract the blood. But it has absorbed. It does have blood in it. So Sif Zayin says, Koydem sheyiten habasar bekli, before you put the meat into a kli, shemedicha boy, that you're going to rinse it. Now, hadocha here means to rinse in a pail, a bucket, right? You're going to soak it, you're going to rinse it, as opposed to another word called yishtefeno, which we'll see next. So before you put it into the kli shemediach bo, that you're going to rinse it out, yenapetz me'alav hamelach shalav, you do want to shake off the salt that's on top of the piece. Okay, in other words, before we soak it or rinse it in the water, you want to shake off the salt. Or, if you don't want to shake off the salt, if you have a hose, or you have some other way of removing the salt, like yishtefeno b'mayim. What's the English word for yishtefeno? Yeah, Ilan, you recall? No. Okay, yishtefeno basically means that you take the piece of meat under the faucet.
Yeah, that's what you mean.
Right.
That means it.
Yeah, but I think for purposes of this halacha, we will call yishtefeno hose it down.
Faucet.
Not necessarily.
You don't call it down.
Yeah. So let's say we're using a hose, okay? And I'll tell you why it's called hosing down in a minute.
You want a strong stream of water.
You want a strong stream of water, right? That's called yishtefeno. Whereas soaking it, let's call it hadocha soaking, and this might be more like rinsing. Hadocha would therefore be soaking. So the Mechaber seems to be saying yenapetz o yishtefeno. He doesn't say both. He says yenapetz, either shake off the salt or rinse it or hose it down with water. V'hakach yiten habasar bekli shemadichin boy. Then go ahead and put it into a bucket, a special bucket, that you want to soak this piece of meat to we're still talking about removing any leftover. Right, so that's why I was looking for a better word than soaking it in, because it's more like dipping it in and out.
Several times.
Oh, we're going to see that. It tells us how many times to do that. That's why I was looking for a better word, because you're not just soaking it inside. You're actually dipping it in, washing it out. All right. So the Mechaber says do it twice. Make sure you rinse out the kli between every time you dip it into the bucket. Okay. So the Mechaber seems to imply that what's necessary here is a combination of niputz hamelach or shtifa, which is the first step to remove the salt. And after that, you want to dip it twice. You want to rinse it out well inside the kli, the water that's in the bucket. All right. Why? Well, what's all this all about? And why and how many times do you have to do it? I mean, where do we know this from? So as far as the hadocha post Melicha is concerned, it's also from the Gemara. The Gemara says that when it comes to this process of Melicha and hadocha achroina, as opposed to hadocha rishona. Remember the hadocha rishona, right? The hadocha rishona, or more or less what we call the shriya, is that you soak it to soften the meat, to prepare the meat for salting. That was a completely different reason. We had damba'in, we had various explanations as why that was required. That was a very important one, quite critical, before you begin the melicha process. But here, this one is also very important, but for a totally different reason. We want to remove whatever is left over there, that salt that has blood, apparently. I mean, that's the only reason. You don't really have to soften the meat anymore. It's just that there's salt there, and that salt has blood. So, how do we do it? How many times do we do it? And why do we do it? So we learn it from the Gemara. The Gemara there that talks about Melicha and tells us how much. Just says, Molcha yofe yofe. You salt it very well, thoroughly. We discussed that too. Whether you can do it just on one side, would you do it on both sides, would you have to cover every square inch, what kind of salt, right? You do a thorough job. That's how we hold. As best as possible, you cover all sides. So the Gemara, the same Gemara that says Molcha yofe yofe, says that afterwards, Madicha yofe yofe. Make sure you rinse it thoroughly. So the Rosh and the Mordechai there, the Rishonim, the Rosh and the Mordechai, they require from that Gemara 2 hadochas. It says yofe yofe, thoroughly, good, good. What does yofe yofe mean? They say you need it twice. In other words, the first time you put it into the water, it'll get some of the salt off. Do it again. And by the second time, you will have removed pretty much all the salt. That's what they say. So they are the ones that say 2 times. If you look at the Rambam, he doesn't tell us an amount of hadochas. He just says, do it thoroughly, just wash it out well, to get the salt out. He doesn't say how many times. But what about shaking off the salt? So he says like this. This language, that the Mechaber is bringing here, Yinapetz and Olav, is really also taken from the Gemara, from Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi, the one who used to salt the meat, that we had, the case in the Gemara of what kind of salt he was using. Over there it says that he would shake off the salt. And then we had a question about what kind of salt it was. Did it make a difference, the thicker salt, the thinner salt? But the Mechaber seems to take from there that there is an inyan to shake off the salt. So the Shach over here brings this particular idea of Niputz HaMelech, and it says like this. The Lamaisa, this is the Lashon of the Rashba. The Lashon of the Rashba, Teres Habayis, is as follows. Why do we want to shake off the salt? If you're going to take this piece of meat with the salt and you're going to put it directly into water, we are concerned that the water will become very, very salty, full of that salt, brine, and blood, of course. And then salty, very salty water will have a certain koach in it to take back the blood inside the meat. Says you don't want all that salt in that water, unless it's maybe a whole swimming pool of water. If it's a lot of water, then it wouldn't be a problem. But if you have a bucket of water, you have a big piece of meat, you're going to put it inside, that's going to be very salty water. So this is the Rashba. The Rashba is saying, get rid of that salt. Shake it off before you put it into the water. That's not everybody has that concern that the Rashba does, but that's the concern of the Rashba. That the water will become salty enough that there's maybe a chance that the blood will come back in.
That should not be worse than...
What do you mean soak?
Well, normally you have to leave a piece of meat soak.
No, remember it's sear. We're talking about sear, hot stuff. In 6 minutes, you'll be in trouble. Yeah. So the Rashba has this. It's a remote chashash, maybe, but he says that is one of the concerns, that they're going to be Yore Deah, and they're going to the piece of it is going to absorb once again from the blood that's mixed in the salt.
So it's basically picked.
Almost, yeah, exactly. But wait a minute, I thought we learned the famous concept, Aide de Torid, right? Lemiflet lo bola. We learned the concept that as it is, what was the word for the lemiflet? As it's expelling, right? As it's expelling the blood, the process of expelling the blood, it cannot swallow, it cannot absorb. Yeah, that you cannot say anymore. Why? Because now that it's in the water, this water neutralizes the salt. When you put that salty piece of meat, when that salt hits the water, that water will neutralize the salt, will take away its koach, and it is no longer able to be maflit so much. Right? The water is canceling out the koach of the melech, koach haplita. Therefore, you can't say I did the torid, the miflad lo bala. But the Shach says for something very good. The Shach says, you know why this is maybe lechatchila. You do this lechatchila, but you know why b'di'evet it's not a problem? Because I have an opposite svora to the concern, an opposite svora that can actually help me. We are saying now that the water cancels out the koach of the salt. The koach of the plita of the basar. Actually, the water is canceling that koach, neutralizing that koach. I'll tell you something even better, he says, that takes away any concern. That same water destroys the salt to an extent that the salt is not anymore roiseach. You're concerned that the salt will be roiseach and will make that whole water mixture salty, right? And therefore, and the koach plita is no longer there because it hit the water, and the meat hit the water, then it's pretty much not going to expel any more blood. In other words, the whole thing is neutralized. He says, that same water that you're concerned is becoming salty, that same water is really killing the salt. It's killing the salt to the point of where that salt is no longer roseach, not as much. It can't be. It's diluted. So he says that, that's how we hold. We hold that salt hitting a good amount of water will not be as powerful anymore. And therefore, don't worry about it. It will not have that same koach of reabsorbing the blood. But it was good to just review this point, to try to understand why would there be a need for niputz hamelach? Or should you have to shake off the salt before you, or can't you just throw it into the water? Can't you just? So he says, yeah, lechatchila, it's better. We have that concern of the Rashba. You don't want that water to get too salty. The
What does it do?
Well, the kli, we did see that you want to clean the keli ben rechitza lerechitza, but it's not going to do anything. You don't want to have anything left over. It's not going to do anything to. We're going to soon see in the next seif. We don't have any concerns about the kli so much per se right now. There are some other concerns, but not really. It's not a big deal. But you are going to rinse it out anyway. The Pri Megadim, however, adds there's another little concern that you have to watch out for. If you're going to put this piece of meat in a kli she'eino menukav, in a bucket that has no holes, it's not perforated, you may accumulate in a couple minutes some sear, some of that brine. And this piece of meat could be soaking in the sear. And that could come back into the...
So we were talking all along...
No, clearly that's not menukav.
So that's his concern.
That's his concern, because then you have this potential problem. If you have a kli menukav, you can't really soak it. You don't have water, it just flows. When do you have menukav? When you're salting it, you need a place with holes, a place with a slant where it will fall off. Now you just want to soak it, you need something to hold the water. So because it's not menukav, because it's holding the water, then if there is no water at all, there could be a problem there. So usually, as the poskim explain these halachas, usually, even if there's no water, it's only a minute or two before you start pouring water into the bucket. So in the minute or two, we're not concerned there's going to be a whole accumulation of... But the Pri Megadim says that's...
So you don't have the water in the bucket?
You should. Like this, you don't have the problem. But in case you didn't, that's what he's saying. If you got rid of the salt, you have less problems. If you will menapitz the mela, because just in case you put it down, and it's all going to accumulate, all that stuff. But... It's not such a big deal for a variety of reasons. We're going to later on see towards the end of the Siman that anything that really comes out of the piece of meat after a certain amount of time is mohel. It's not really blood. It's not really anything that we have to be concerned with. But it's still a machlokes between the Mechab and the Ramon, Sif Chof, I think. Towards the end of the Siman, what happens if somebody left it there for a good amount of time, sitting in that sear, in that mohel?
The question is, are we concerned with that moil that you're talking about, or are we concerned with the salt that it's sitting in?
No. So the Pri Megadim adds on the other. That's the Rashba's concern.
After you rinsed it off,
right,
or hosed it off and removed the salt,
then there's usually not a problem.
So then you're not worried about the moil.
Not so much
because
because
will be coming out.
Not really. Not that much.
Releases.
Mohel, yes.
Mohel, I'm talking about mohel.
Yeah.
So the
but
mohel
here,
that comes out after you've off the salt, you're not worried about.
That's the machlokes later on.
But
at this point, the Pri Megadim is just adding that it's also an issue, the fact that you didn't remove all the salt. And even if you did, like you just said, and there's still a little bit more coming down, accumulating in a kli, in a container. After the fact, after the melicha already occurred, you still have a problem of sitting in that mohel.
Even though I removed the
salt. So the Pri Megadim is just adding this additional detail that this is an additional concern to remember, to keep in mind as you're putting it down. So therefore, you want to remove the melach, you want to take care of.
So so removing the melach is the solution to the problem he has in mind.
It helps. It definitely helps. Yeah.
So then he's not worried about the mold because the mold was still coming out.
Because according to Mechaber, that's only a chumrah later on. Mechaber says, right. I think so. I believe so because
if removing the salt helps with the problem, then the problem was the salt and not the mold. Because even after
No, it's not the
salt,
moil.
will still be out.
It could be blood in the salt. Also,
Yeah, but that's
if there's no salt, there's only moil. Remember? Yeah. So it could be the Pri Megadim is alluding to the fact that if you still have the salt, you also have the blood, maybe.
If you still have the salt, yes.
Right. So I think I didn't.
So his concern is the salt with the blood.
That's what I recall. Yeah. Yeah. I was just adding that perhaps you would be right too, because that's a machlokes v'mechaber at the end. That even if there's no salt, there's just moil, it could be an issue.
No, that wasn't my point.
Right.
My point was the exact opposite.
Right.
That it sounded from what you were saying, the salt with the blood more so.
Yeah. Right. As long as you don't have any water, it would be a problem. Right. Once you have the water there, then at least some of the water takes care of the melach, some of the water takes care of the...
Now, you're not supposed to leave it in that water very long, you said.
Oh, no. This is not to be left. This is just to soak, to rinse, to remove. We don't leave it. You dip it. Otherwise you have the Rashba's concern. You just leave it there. Salty water coming back.
The truth is, I still don't understand really what you when you do that.
Yeah.
Because you just finished hosing off the salt with the blood.
Right.
Or rinsing off the salt with the blood. So I have a piece of meat that's salt and blood free on the outside of the surface.
Right.
Whatever blood was in the meat already removed by the salt. Now the salt with the blood was removed, rinsing or hosing off.
Okay, very good.
What are you putting it in? What are you dipping it into water for? What are you trying to accomplish?
Very good. So we'll see that. We'll see that next. Good point. Yeah. What we do know so far is that the Mechaber says that Yinapetz or Yishtefeno. And what is he referring to, Yinapetz or Yishtefeno? To the salt.
And that's before he puts it into
That's before he dips it. It's to the actual salt. So what does the Hadacha therefore imply? The Hadacha basically says that what I got off was what's on the surface. And whatever is the thicker stuff, the one that has the blood. And now I want to make sure I clean it very, very well of any of that salt that may be a little bit more absorbed or closer to the surface that did not come off. That will come off with the Hadacha. So the question is, do I need both? And the answer is, not really. Because you are right. In a sense, you can accomplish everything by hosing it up. That's very, very true. But they didn't have hoses back then, or they didn't use the pressure that they have today. If you definitely can accomplish it. On the contrary, we will see that there's some pros and cons to the two methods, right? But right now, somehow the Mechaber, and it's very good that you raised the point, appears to be saying two things that don't really, I shouldn't say don't really, appear to be redundant. In other words, one is why, if you did this, why do that? It does, I admit, it does appear to be like that, but he's quoting from other sources that you need it's a good idea to remove the melach. Besides that, you want to, for the Gemara it says, you want to thoroughly rinse it off, whatever still remains there. So the question was really more on the niputs than it was in the Hadocha. Because the Hadocha, I understand, because he's taking the Lashon as it is from the Gemara, remove everything, from the meat. Well, then why do I need niputs for? So we said that was a concern of the Rashba. You don't want to do the Hadocha together with the melach. All right, but what if you did niputs and you did shtifa? Do you still need Hadocha? So that was Ilan's question, really. If you've already accomplished pretty much everything, then why do both?
When the Rashba, right? When the Rashba comes and says, don't put this in the curd with water until you've removed the salt.
Right.
By removing the salt, he appears to have removed the reason to care.
Right. So we will see, I'll tell you already by heart, basically, it's a combination of the two. But in reality, you can do one or the other. What this means is that as long as you did it sufficiently, in other words, you did it enough, thoroughly, you don't need both. You can use either or. So the whole question will be, how many times? Is it going to be Hadacha 3 times? Or is it going to be Hadacha 2 times if you did Shtifa once? So without looking inside the Mechaber Demo, I'm already letting you know by heart that this is what it amounts to. It comes out to being, I need to do it thoroughly. Thoroughly means 2 or 3 times. Well, Mechaber says if you did 1 Shtifa, then all you need is 2 Hadachas. What if I do 2 Shtifas? What if I spend 3-4 minutes, hosing it down? Then of course you don't need Hadacha. That's what it's going to come down to. So the Mechaber says, Yinapetz me'olav, o yishtefenu b'mayim, to get rid of all that salt. Ve'achar kach yiten abasu b'kli shemadichim bo. And how many times should he do it? 2 more times. In this way, you get rid of it, of everything that's there. Between the shtifa once and the hadacha twice, you get rid of it. So now the question is, getting back to, let me, like we say in Hebrew, nechaded et hashela shelcha. In other words, let's sharpen it a little bit. All right, if I did shtifa, then why do hadacha? Isn't shtifa better than hadacha? It appears to be that it at least counts as one. But shtifa, there's an opinion that says there's a mila to shtifa because shtifa is not being done in a keli. And if it's not being done in a keli, that means that there's no chance of the water getting salty. So there is definitely an advantage of doing shtifa, as the poskim say, in the air. You're holding the piece of meat in the air, and you're hosing it down, or you're pouring water all over it. So I saw, I think it was the Yad Yehuda. Let me see here. Yeah. The Yad Yehuda says like this. He says, in our days we have a faucet at home. And you could do good shtifa underneath the faucet. You take the piece of meat, and you open the faucet, and do shtifa 3 times or more. Or however many times you need to, depending on the size of the piece, or whatever. You can do a good job by rinsing it down under the faucet. He still says it's a good idea, it's the right thing to do is to do hadacha 3 times, even after you rinsed it under the faucet. Why? Because he says, he claims very interesting. He says hadacha has one advantage over shtifa. Hadacha will get to every nook and cranny, is that how you say it in English? Every crevice of the piece of meat. Shtifa may not. So he says the hadacha really is the right way to do it, not shtifa. Just that shtifa counts as one hadacha according to the mechaber.
So it's actually 3 times, only one is taken care of
by having rinsed
rinsing it or shaking off.
Exactly. So that's what many poets can learn, that there's no machlokes between the mechaber and the Ramah. It appears that there may or may not be. We're unsure. So some say that it's really not a machlokes because the mechaber is saying, like the Ramah is going to say, that we're going to need 3 hadachas, but if you did 1 time shtifa, that took care of 1 hadacha. Because if you look at the mechaber says you need 2 hadachas. The Ramah says like this. Let's read the Ramah. V'yesh omrim shetzrichim ladiach habasar sholosh be'omim. Quotes the various Rishonim here. V'hochi nohagin lechatchila, and that is how we firzach. That's how we're accustomed to. Lechatchila. Al kain, therefore, yishtefeno oy napetz hamelach me'olov. It's interesting. He says al kain. Therefore, first go ahead and remove the salt, shake off the salt, or rinse it off. V'yadicheno beis pe'amim. And then do the hadacha twice. That would constitute hadacha 3 times. Or yasim amayim tocha kli, put the water into the kli. Go ahead and soak it and rinse it out 3 times in the bucket. Put a lot of water in the first hadacha, so they should neutralize the koach of the salt in the tzir. And then he adds one more detail. You can use orange juice, prune juice, any fruit juice for this last hadacha, and you don't necessarily need water. We're going to get back to that in a second. So, for the last hadacha, if you don't have water, you have prune juice, you have water, you have orange juice, you have tomato juice. You can use those liquids too, those juices. It doesn't have to be water H2O. Yeah, the Ramah says that, and basically everybody holds like that. All the poskim I saw say that hadocha achroina would not be a problem to use. We're going to talk about it, hadocha rishon, in a second, whether you could use it. But hadocha achroina, nobody seems to have really a problem with it, with using, if you don't have water. But obviously water is better. So from the mechaber, all we saw is that 1 time shtifa, niputz, and 2 times hadacha. Ramah seems to be saying you need 3. Yeshar that you need 3. Now, the Taz over here says that the nafkamina, the obvious nafkamina, according to the Taz between the Mechaber and the Ramah, is that according to the Mechaber, niputz is like hadacha. Because he says yinapetz or yishtefeno. So the Taz makes a very good point. The Mechaber says, Ni yenapitz o yishtefeno. So that would be one nafkamina, one difference between the Mechaber and the Ramah. Whereas the Ramah would say, listen, niputz is not an adocha. You want to do shtifa b'mayim? Fine. But not niputz. And he wants to say that it's really, I think, a ta'ut sofer here. It's a mistake. It should be a ken yishtefeno u yenapitz amerla. Not that it should be one or the other.
So shake off the sole, rinse it off under a faucet.
Right.
Who is it that says that?
The Taz. So he considers the shtifa, niputz shtifa, as one hadacha, but not that he's not saying that niputz would constitute as an hadacha. But if you did one, in other words, you did shtifa, you only need two more hadachas. Shach explains this seif in two ways. He says, according to the Shuchan Aruch, the shtifa in the air, if you do shtifa in the air, it's enough to do it twice, hadacha, because it's not in a kli. In other words, the first shtifa, I think actually meant one. He learns it in various ways. One way is that if you did it in the air, not in a kli, it's enough twice. The Ramah says in every way you need it 3 times, even if it's not in a kli. Or the Shach says you can also learn there's no machlokes between Mechaber and the Ramah, that if you did one shtifa, then the 2 hadachas will combine with the shtifa to constitute 3. So either you hold that the 2 hold the same, the Mechaber and the Ramah both hold you need a combination of 3, 1 shtifa and 2 hadachas, or the Shach learns that the pshat in the Mechaber could also be talking about that when you do shtifa in the air, it's not in a kli, it's somewhat better, and all you need is 2 times. Just another way of learning the Mechaber. But I think the consensus here is clear that, if you read the language, to me the language is pretty simple. That I don't think there's any machlokes. And they're both learning that if you did shtifa, all you need is 2 more hadachas. Or if you didn't do shtifa, then you need 3 hadachas. It seems to be, I think that they both agree to that idea, to that principle. All right, as far as May Paris, the Ramah told us about May Paris that you can use that for Adocha Achroina, but not really for Adocha Rishoina. And the reason for that, in the Daich Moshe brings down in Adocha Rishoina, remember we always have the need of softening the meat, and there's a concern that juices will not soften the meat. If anything, may harden and close the pores of the meat. It's not the acidity. It may not do the job that water will do. So lechatchila, you definitely don't want to use May Paris for Adocha Rishoina. The Taz and Shach both say that it's also perfectly acceptable even for Adocha Rishoina. I think it was the Prach. I don't have it written down in my notes, but I think it was the Prach and others who say don't use May Paris for Adocha Rishoina. So we don't use fruit juice or anything for Adocha. We try to use water. The question will be, of course, in a B'di'evet, but Adocha Achroina, the last hadacha, when you're removing the salt, could be done with any liquid, any juice. All right, so now that we understand the significance of removing the salt and how it's done and how many times are required, Seif Ches tells us what happens if you didn't do it. Right? Seif Tes tells us what happens if you salted it and you cooked it without hadacha, which is even worse. Here in Sif Ches, it's an in-between situation.
What's this?
I'm going to read it from inside. Im lo nipetz hamelach shalof, if you did not remove the salt, v'lo shotfo, and you didn't really hose it down, ein lesser.
So now what you're going to soak it?
You're going to put it in the bucket. In other words, you didn't do the whole complete job properly, like I told you to do in Sif Zayin. Okay? You did something. So im lo nipetz hamelach shalof v'lo shotfo, ein lesser. It's okay, even though it went inside. Remember who had a concern about it? The Rashba. You got to remove all that salt. Okay, he didn't do that. He didn't remove it. He didn't hose it down. He just took this piece of meat or chicken and placed it into the bucket full of water. He says it's okay. Why? Ein leso ki hamayim shebekli mevatin koach hamelach. He says you have water, and the water will get rid of the koach hamelach.
Why does he want to shake it anyway? According to this reasoning, really, according to his reasoning now, he was instructing you to do something that he will carry.
No. He's just saying, as opposed to not having any water at all. He's concerned that what happens if you left it without any. There is a problem. There may be a problem. But he says, as long as there was some water in the bucket, then you've avoided trouble.
Because the water will disarm
the salt.
Damage the salt with the blood might cause.
Right.
So if that is so, then he has just the whole reason why he first shake it off and rinse it before you soak.
Yeah, it's only the Rashba.
So
he's quoting
just
the
Rashba. He mentions that.
That's all. Exactly. Right. Lemaisa, he holds you don't have to be concerned. Right. Where does he take this from? Of course, from the Tur, the Isa Beheter, and Beis Yosef over there on the Tur says that this is a reasonable explanation. What they say that the Maim Shebeklime Vatlin Koach HaMelech, it makes sense. He says that is the svara, but he holds lechatchila menaptzoi, like we saw before. You do remove the salt because you're choishish to that other svara. That's all. What is that other svara? That the salty water could be bringing back the blood into the piece of meat. The Gra, I believe I saw here in the Biur Gra, that if you look at the Gemara from Rav Dimi, the language there that he was menapetz, it didn't seem like he was leikuva. So this seif, this halacha fits in with, as the Gra says, with the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't seem that this is leikuva. Leikuva means that this would pose a problem in case you didn't do it. Menapetz. But what if I didn't? The Gemara doesn't say. If it would be a real problem, the Gemara would say. So the Gemara says the fact that the lashon there does not appear to be indicating any kuva, that there is a problem, this halacha is acceptable. I mean, this halacha makes sense. In other words, it's not a... Yes, exactly.
So we're going to shaking.
Yeah. Now here the Shach is interesting. The Shach says, you know what? It's not just the water that's canceling out the salt, the power of the salt. It's also tzir. Any of the juices that are coming out of the pieces of meat also can cancel out the koach of the salt. And that's very interesting, surprising a little bit. Because we're talking about definitely tzir that is after the shir melicha. Of course, not before. And that is really a machloikas later on, like we said in Sif Chav, between the Mecham and Ramah. All that tzir that comes out after the half an hour, or after the hour, if there's still something coming out, and it's sitting in it, it's a machloikas Mecham and Ramah, really. What to do? Even though it may not answer more than a K'dei Klipa, it's still a concern. So how come the Shach says, this over here, that this tzir is just as good as the water and canceling out the koach? Tzir? It's dangerous stuff. You don't want to have the people sitting the tzir. So I think it's the Dogel Meravava. Yeah, Dogel Meravava here says that this Shach is going according to the Mecham, that the tzir just as much as the water would also have the same koach of neutralizing the salt. So the fact that it's sitting in some juice or some liquid already is good. If it's sitting without any liquid whatsoever, it's a problem because,
It's pickling.
It's pickling. But the Shach says that it's not going to be such a big deal.
Also, pickling in the blood is not a big deal.
No, not according to the Mechaber. Because it's sear that came out after the shir melicha. That sear that comes out after the piece of meat was salted enough is not a problem. It's mohel. It's not really dam, it's not nothing. But
this is, you didn't rinse it off.
Yeah.
You have it sitting in the bucket without any water.
Right.
And its own salt and whatever blood was accumulated in the salt.
Yeah, the blood could be a problem if there's a problem. Yeah, but not the tzir. He says, the Shach says, "Lo choshiv kiraseh leso abosu lat dafka mayim elahu adin tzir, ela denokat mayim lafuk echad eleka lo mayim velo mohe ela michui dam shel iser." Because if all you had was blood sitting there, then obviously you don't want to have that going back in. It would be also kedei klipa. But if you did have an accumulation of tzir, then the Mechaber at least says you're okay, and that would cancel or neutralize the salt.
So this is now the Shach understand Mechaber.
Yes, that's how the Dogel Meravava explains it.
But Dagul Meravava explains the Mechaber, or the Dagul Meravava
explains the Shach, that the Shach must be must be going on this Mechaber, because if he's talking about tzir, the Ramah later on is concerned about tzir just as much as about dam. Even though it's the tzir after the shir melicha, the Ramah is concerned about that. But we'll wait till we get to there. All right. So that was the mechaber. So the mechaber says the mind should be kli mevatin koach hamelach. So the Ramah says like this: afilu amayim mu'atim, even if you have a little bit of water, mikol mokom mevatim koach hatzir, they have the ability to cancel, to neutralize the koach of the tzir. V'yesh matirin afilu lo hayu mayim klal bekli. Some are saying it's okay if there was no water for a moment. I'm adding the words for a moment. V'nichu ba'basar. Why? The ein lochush b'shah mu'etes. We don't have to be that concerned that in a little bit of time before you manage to put water, she'oiskim ba'dochas basar, that you're going to have an accumulation of tzir and dam, and the salt is going to reabsorb it back into the basar. Some say, listen, even if you didn't have it at the very first moment, it's okay. You're going to rinse it off anyway within a couple moments, a couple minutes, right? So the Ramah says it's okay. For a couple minutes, of course. You can rely on them, and you don't have to be so concerned about all of this only at the stage of the first hadacha. But if you've already done one hadacha, at all. Even though you need 2 or 3, once you've done one rinsing, you can leave it there a few minutes. For sure not. No problem. All of this is only a concern before you got any water onto that meat. That meat is sitting, it's salty, you want to rinse it off as soon as possible. But once you got one hadacha done, you're pretty safe. Ve'ein chiluk bein imidichu bekli basar or treifo. This is interesting. You can take this piece of meat that you salted, and you could do the last hadacha in a fleshik kli, in a treif kli, or melicha kli, or chaleves. If you even had already a little bit of water into this kli, that a little bit of water that will cancel out the power of the salt, then even if those kelim would be a little bit filthy, would have some dirt, some leftover, then it would be good. It would be okay. Now what does that mean? Obviously, you want to do it in a clean keli. You have trouble. You don't want to have to ask a shaila. But sometimes you forgot. You didn't realize then there was some leftovers. You made cheese. You made cheese in that kli that you were
following your instructions.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. You used the kli to make cheese. You had some leftover whey. Remember that? Yeah. The pieces in the bottom. Yeah. It could happen, by the way. Somebody didn't clean it very well. So that's a good kasha. In other words, what then? So the Ramah says, listen, if you had some liquid there, you don't have to worry even if you had pieces. If you didn't have any pieces, it was clean. It could be choleves, it could be milchik, it could be a fleshik kli, it could be treif. The kli is dry and clean. It's not a problem. Why not? Ein melicha lekelim. In other words, we don't hold that melicha is so powerful that it can actually extract the flavor, the tam of a kli. There is a chumrah, of course, of what the melicha does to the actual kli, but to extract tam from the keli, we said already, we learned that it doesn't have that koach. To be maflit, the tam habalua, right? The balua, the blias, that it doesn't have the koach. However, if it's dirty, there's pieces. That's different, because when it comes to pieces, if there's no water, we've already learned in Basar v'chalav that if you have 2 items, the kosher piece is salty, and the milchik or the treif is not salty, then it could be that it will absorb. The saltiness will allow an absorption of tam as long as that tam is in liquid form. So let me read it to you, because the Taz is the one that explains it a little bit more. The Taz says, the Shem Rashal, that the meat can become also from cholav, because we're talking about dirt here, only if we're talking about liquid cholav, because then it's similar to Siman Tzadik Aleph in Hilchas Basar b'cholav, right? Where the kosher one, the tohar, maliach, v'tomeh tofel, the meat or the kosher item is the salty one, and the tomeh or the treif is the one that's not salty, but it's solid, it's liquid, that the meat is able to absorb from the liquid cholav. But if the cholav let's say, is not liquid. You have pieces of whey, pieces of dry milk, pieces of dry cheese, still littering the bottom of the bucket, of the pail. That's not a problem. The salty one, in this case the meat, will not be bolea from solids. In other words, the halacha that the salt can absorb tam of another food, whether it's treif or melichix, is only if it's in liquid form. Then we say you put the two together, it is able to draw from the liquid. But from two solids next to each other, even though one is salty, it will not absorb, unless you run into the issue, into the sugya of shaman. If something is greasy. And that's another different kind of question. If, by the way, it would become asur, it would be asur at kedei shishin, because of the problem of shaman. In other words, because the Ramah is the one that is not mechalek between shaman or not shaman, grease, fatty meats, it could cause a problem of being asur until shishin, if the right conditions are met. In other words, that it's salty, it's in liquid form, then it's you would need shishin. But behefsa meruba, we hold that it's kedei klipa is enough. So kedei klipa, that is with the combination of the meat and cheese. But what about dam? Like the isur dam that may be on the bottom of the keli, the shach writes that it would always be asur kedei klipa. The Pri Megadim explains the reason for that is because by dam we're more lenient, because it's a derabanan perhaps, and therefore you would always need a klipa. So even though you may have had some leftover dam at the bottom of the kli, you have a salty piece of meat, it would not asur more than a kedei klipa anyway. So we're more lenient with the blood, but with the basar and chalav, you have to make sure that kli is clean of any residue of melichix or treif, of course, because then it may asur kedei till shishin. And that's only because a piece of meat could be shaman, which brings up the other problem or I should say other machlokes. Those who hold that we're not bekiim if something is fatty or not, and therefore it could asur till shishin. But behefsa meruba, we said asur kedei klipa. So that's pretty much what happens if you did not remove all the salt and you just soaked it in the water. The water would be usually sufficient to cancel out the koach of the melach, and you wouldn't have to worry about it. And the Ramah adds that therefore you would be able to do it in just about any kind of kli, especially if the kli was clean. You had some water there. You don't have to worry about it. Any kli would do for this hadacha. It does become, however, much more complicated in the next seif, which we'll just briefly get into, but we'll leave it for next time. The next seif is, however, a situation where it's basar shenimlach v'nizbashe below hadocha achroina altogether. Now that's a whole different story. So you have the meat, the blood came out because you did melicha, but you never did hadocha. All right. So what could the problem be? Well, the problem is that this melach still has some blood, no matter what you say. So basar shenimlach v'nizbashe below hadocha achroina tzorech sheyeh bo shishin kedei hamelach shebo. Then this meat should have 60.
The meat?
Oh.
No more than that against the blood.
Oh, very good, yeah.
Malua.
Oh, very good. So, therefore, before we go in and see the Ramah, we have to understand what the Mechaber is talking about. He says, Tzorah sheyeh bo shishim kedei hamelach shebo. Oh, all right. Right. So the reality, when I say the word reality, I mean the metzias, is that the meat does not have 60 against the melach shebo. As the Ramah will explain, we're talking about everything together. The liquid in the pot, the potatoes, and the meat, all together need to have shishim keneged hamelach.
Yeah.
Oh, so now we have, wait a minute, why not just against the blood?
Right, because the blood that we have, but we don't know how much blood.
Oh, right. So all we know is the Mechaber says you need keneged hamelach. Even though the culprit here is dam. In other words, who is the trouble? The source of trouble is the blood. There's more melach than there is blood. But Mechaber tells us keneged melach. Well, the good news is, at least according to most poskim, you don't need shishim keneged the whole basar. Imagine this basar.
Yeah.
You cooked it. You never did a dacha achroina. What would be having? Would you need shishim maybe connected the whole basar?
Why would you say that? Look, it was removed.
There's blood in the salt, and isn't that?
But the quantity,
isn't it dovuk?
Oh, you mean according to the ones that hold?
Yeah. There is one sheet. There is one or two sheetas actually that say shishim connected the whole chatichas basar. Yeah. So anyway, let's just go quickly through it. So basar shanim levenizmah shebelo adoch achron so sheyeh bo shishim kedei hamelach shebos. The Mechaber really doesn't tell us where you're going to get the 60 from. All it tells us you need 60 keneged the melach. So the Ramah says kol hakdera mitztaref l'shishim, the whole kdera. V'im yesh b'kdera kol kach kemo hachaticha kshenimlach v'lo hudach hakol shori. If you have in the whole pot as much as this piece of meat that was not hudach hakol shori. Why? The vada ika shishim neged hamelach she'al. You know why you have 60 against the salt? The achaticha atzma bevada yishloishim neged hamelach she'alav. Because just the piece alone has 30 times the amount in the volume against the salt. Just the piece alone. So that's just the mitzias. The piece is at least 30 times more than the salt that envelops it. So therefore, that together with whatever else is cooking, you should have shishim against the whole melach. No problem. So the question is, well, wait a minute. You don't need against the whole chaticha? Do you need against the whole chaticha? Just against the salt? White salt and not the blood? So here we have the question of Hanan. The question of Hanan comes up over here. The core of this halacha that we need shishim is taken from the smak. That the reason why you don't calculate shishim only against the dam is because of Hanan. That's the smak says. The smak says Hanan on the melach.
But then you should say Hanan on every year.
Right. And this is what the Taz brings down. The Taz brings down that that's the reasoning in the smak. It's Hanan. So the Shach says, well, wait a minute, you can't say that. That's not the reason. No. That can't be the reason here. He says because it doesn't work with the Mechaber, the Tur, and all these poskim that don't hold Hanan b'shari surim. So that can't be the. It doesn't make sense. When Mechaber, remember, Mechaber is also saying, can you get the whole melach? So the Shach says, the Taz says, yeah, Hanan. But the Shach says, no, that can't be the reason here. And the Shach says more like you were beginning to say, Ilan, that really we don't know how much blood there is. That's the simple reason here. It has nothing to do with Hanan. Yeah, that's all he says. As far as the reason for the Mechaber saying against the whole salt.
Sufficient reason.
Yeah. The Taz, by the way, is the one that brings that other shita from the Marshal that you will need shishim keneged the whole chaticha, because he holds it's an Isur Davuk. The Melach here is like an Isur Davuk, but everybody is choylek on that. He said, no way, we don't hold like that here. This is not called an Isur Davuk. Why isn't this called an Isur Davuk? Because as soon as you put it into the water, the salt already begins to melt and fall off. This is not a real Davuk.
First of all, the only time an Isur Davuk would actually come with the Isur Davuk to the. But here, by the time the water reaches, we're talking about cooking.
Right.
By the time the water reaches temperature of cooking,
exactly. That's what. Yes, exactly. That's what the person holds. By the time it goes into the water, even it's going to dissolve. So it's not a real Isur Davuk. So it's surprising that the Marshal would say you need to connect the whole chaticha. Yeah. So therefore, in this case, you don't have to worry about the whole chaticha, but you do have to worry about the melach. But the good news is that most likely you have between everything in the pot, you probably do have shishim keneged the melach. The question will be, what happens if you don't have? If you don't have shishim begdero keneged the melach, afilu lo husam rak bekli sheni. Here's a chiddush. Even if all you did was take this piece of meat and put it in a kli sheni, which is not mevashel, remember that? Sure. But because here you have a combination of powerful salt in a kli sheni, akol asur. The me'acha sheyesh melach v'tzir afilu b'kli sheni mevashel.
Well, there's also a problem because the melach has already lost its special.
Right. Yeah. That's why it's not across the board. Not everybody holds that. The makor of this Ramah is from the Mordechai who is mesupok, if that would be the case. He's mesupok. And nevertheless, yeah, exactly. I think it's a beheter, I think was the one that said Nohagules or the Klisheni. But the Taz, if you look at the Taz, he writes B'Shem the Rasha that we're lenient, we're not machmer just because of Melach and a Klisheni. The Shach brings the same Rasha, but he says we shouldn't be making only behefsa meruba. So it's a little bit of a discussion whether we should or we should not. It's a suffix, because perhaps the combination. Remember, we hold there are places the whole Klisheni is not mevashel, but it does have the koach to be mavlia or maflit. In other words, it may have some koach. That's the whole question here. And that's what we need. That's all you need. If it could be mavlia or maflit, you don't need to be mavashel here. If all it is maflia or maflit together, and then you have the salt, maybe it does give it more koach. So that's the question here, and of course the Ramah seems to take that opinion that you would need to be machmer, unless maybe it's a hefsa meruba. Anyway, it's a longer Ramah. The Ramah goes on to other questions. A very interesting question, but we'll cover it next time. What happens if somebody wants to recycle the salt and use it again for another piece of meat? Can he do that? We're into recycling these days. Well, why? With oil. I asked Tony how many times does he use? They do some deep frying over here, for the fish. And he uses it a lot with the chili peppers. Do you use it? How often do you use it? Do you throw it away every single time? He says you can really only use it up to 2 times. After that, it gets very, very dirty. It's dark. It smells. It's not so good. You have to throw it away. It wouldn't be right for you to reuse it. And the same thing with automotive oil. After a while, it's no good. You have to dispose of it. You have to get an oil change. So melach, of course, is not oil exactly, but it does lose its koach. It does, after a while, lose some of its koach at least. And that will be the question: is it totally unusable, or can it still be used? So that's another interesting idea that is brought down here. But let's not forget that that's not the only concern. The other concern is that this melach, to reuse it still has blood in it. So not only is it a possibility of it may not work. You have to be concerned about the dam in there. That's what we're doing a dacha to begin with. All right, Mr. Hashem, we'll continue with that next time.